Well, happy Wednesday again, Cross family. We're continuing in our series on following Jesus while in lockdown. As we've mentioned before, this is going to include number one, following the Holy Spirit as Jesus did. Number two, developing the characteristics that he had, the habits that he had. So we've talked about prayerfulness, humility, faithfulness, thankfulness, joyfulness. Tonight we're talking about kindness as the second part of that combination of being patient and kind. And then finally, third, when things really become concrete, and that's kind of what I'm hoping to talk about tonight. That's the third part of becoming who Jesus would be in your position, is to actually do the things that you have to do as he would in your position. So last week, I think it's really essential to include patience and kindness together. You could maybe look at it a little bit of it like this, where patience is kind of the defense, right? And kindness is the actual offense. It's where ground is taken as far as our character is concerned. It's where habit is really developed, not just to keep from giving into moods, which is what patience is all about, but to actually be productive when we don't feel like it, right? Or to be kind when we don't feel like it, or whatever. So last week we talked about how patience means long suffering. That's what the word means. I tend to think of patience as waiting, right? Like being at the grocery store line or something like that. But Paul is describing it as actually suffering for a long time. And so we talked about, how does that happen? Like, how is it that we can become long suffering? And if you'll see the messages we've done before, it comes from plugging into and taking advantage of and being sustained by the joy of the Lord, which is our strength. And the scripture says that the joy, or in the fullness of joy is in the presence of God. And so the key to patience, to suffer long, is to be able to really kind of get your sustenance from the sense of well-being that comes from Jesus being with you, and the knowledge that his presence is more enjoyable than all he has made, which means that it's, at the very least, it's good enough to get you through a lousy or unenjoyable process. Because even if you were in a perfect condition, there would that perfect condition would feel incomplete without his presence, right? And so when Paul's talking about being patient and kind in 1 Corinthians 13, Jesus was these things, that's kind of a wild picture, right? Because normally when people are tested or suffering at all, they lash out. They want others to share their pain. And it's a supernatural situation, and our character can be formed supernaturally to align with Jesus's, to be in an uncomfortable situation while being capable of working towards the comfort and flourishing of others, which is what it is to be patient and kind, or kind while suffering, right? So the word in 1 Corinthians 13, the Greek word for kindness, basically means benevolence. It means to work for the good of other people. And so there's plenty of reasons why we should be kind, right? You may just be kind out of your social conditioning, like you just get this idea that it's the moral thing to do. It does happen to be the moral thing to do, but it can just, you could get that from Disney videos, right? You can get that from anywhere. There's motives for parents to teach their young kids to be kind. I am motivated to do that, right? At a very long-term level, it could be because if they're really rude and obnoxious, they're going to be set up for a world of hurt as they are rejected by their peers, right? It could be because parents don't want to be ashamed, right? If their kids act up like crazy. When you're older, you might want to be kind because it will increase your social standing, right? When you get a job, you'll get promoted and do better if you're kind. You could just be motivated to be kind because when you're kind to people, people tend to be kind to you, right? These are all things that I think are important. They can't be skipped. They're important motives at different times and stages and phases. But the thing that I'm really interested in is learning to develop the character that aligns with Jesus's, because those were not his motives when he was doing public ministry, right? He wasn't being kind to sell more carpentry work, right? He certainly wasn't being nice to people so that they would be nice to him. He talks about in the Sermon on the Mount where what he says, what does it benefit you if you greet those who greet you, right? And if you're good to those that are good to you. And he says the pagans do that. And he says, instead, love your enemies, pray for those who persecute you. And the idea is that this whole reciprocal, equal and opposite reaction rule that's very natural it's not an outstanding moral situation. It's not impressive. The mafia does that, right? I mean, they're nice to people that are nice to them. It's no accomplishment. And but he would say that learn to love those who don't love you so that you can be like your Father who gives rain to the righteous and the wicked. And so we've talked this whole series about why we would want to have Jesus's character. And again, some of it could be that, like, if you're trying to blend in with the church culture, then that's the rules. And if you want to hang out, you need to, look like that. It's a very low motivation. I mean, it's it's one thing to play by the rules so you can hang. That's fine. But the actual peak of this is to learn to be like Jesus so that we can like Jesus. I mean, the reason we're talking about developing his character is so that we can actually enjoy his presence rather than grate on it, come into friction and conflict with it. And so the less and less we depend on reciprocal actions, that is, being kind to people so that they're kind to us, because obviously oftentimes that doesn't happen. And like Jesus says, when that does happen, so what, right? I mean, anybody does that. What we're trying to do is reduce our dependencies on other people's attitudes towards us, right? We've been referencing James 1, 2 through 4 often in this series because that is the place where the character is developed. James says, consider it joy when you face trials or testings of any kind or many kinds, because it is by those times that your confidence in God is deepened, strengthened. And he says, when faith has its full effect, then you become perfect and complete, lacking nothing. What does that mean? It means that you know how to rely on God in any situation, to do as Jesus would do in your position. You can rely on the joy of the Lord in any situation, not needing external comfort, but being able to rely on his presence in your life to be the light that you're called to be for the sake of other people, but also for the sake of getting to know who Jesus would be in this position. So I kind of want to present this idea here of understanding these opportunities to be kind while patient. So we talked about this last week. Whenever you're hurrying or procrastinating, you're not being patient, right? To hurry is the opposite of patience, and to procrastinate means you're avoiding the thing altogether. And so I don't want to talk about kindness in the form of being nice to someone who's mean to you. Someday that'll be the case. But we've talked about this in the past. Willard says you have to begin where you are, not where you're not. We're not trying to be heroes. And Mother Teresa said that love doesn't have to be extraordinary to be real. What we need to do is ordinary things with extraordinary love. And that's kind of what I'm wanting to present this as, okay? So we talked last week about how you don't really need to be thinking about big, huge trials until you can compete or complete little kind of smaller ones, right? Just engaging something you're avoiding is a form of your confidence that God is more enjoyable than all he has made. It's good to start there, right? And same thing with kindness, putting love into ordinary things, or extraordinary love into ordinary things. And so I've told this story before, but I want to give this example. When I was a little kid, my best friend in the world was my little teddy bear, Teddy. And it was a polar bear that used to be white and ended up being gray after a lot of hang time. Okay. And this one night, I remember I left Teddy at my grandma's house and felt, I mean, like I froze when I realized that I did this. I mean, like it hurt in the pit of my gut. They live 45 minutes away. And so I told my mom, I was like, hey, I forgot Teddy. Is there any way we can go back? And she said, honey, I mean, we just got back. It's going to take an hour and a half to get there, to go there and back. And she says, I will call grandma though and let her know so she can be on the lookout, take care of him. And so, she says, we can go back the next day. And so I remember driving there, this sense of anticipation, like, is he okay? Did she find him? We walk into the house. I go up the steps. I remember the site of the steps, go in, look around the house, and there's this shoebox on top of the couch in the living room. And I look in it, and Teddy was in the shoebox wrapped up in a little towel. And so my grandma had made a little bed, and basically what she did was package my little treasure. Right now, I've used this illustration in the past to show that grandma didn't treat Teddy well because she loved Teddy. I mean, she had no real attachment to this thing. It's not alive. It's not going to suffer if she doesn't treat it well, right? People's consciences will them take care of animals and stuff like that. This is really just an object, right? And the only reason she did that is because she loved me, right? She dealt with the task at hand because of who I was. I was precious to her. Teddy was not. And so this is kind of the life that we're being called to. And that is not just loving other people for God's sake, rather than how they treat us, right? For those motives I mentioned earlier, but doing these tasks, right? Whether it's washing the dishes, whether it's doing your homework, you can do your homework not just patiently, but you can do it kindly, right? You can do it in a way that's not avoiding or hurrying. You can actually engage it steadily while relying on the joy of the Lord, but also kindly, right? And what this means is not resentfully, not, oh, I just, can't wait to get this over with. And, you're not welcome for me doing this, right? You might thank the teacher, whoever assigned it. There's all sorts of tasks that you can do with extraordinary love, which means kindness, right? Which means cooperatively. And so the reason I tell the Teddy story today is because I just wasn't there, right? Grandma wasn't making facial contact, or like we weren't face to face, and her smiling as she took care of Teddy, right? She did this thing that I would later embrace later. And the truth is, that's going to be a major amount of our working life, whether that's school, whether that's data entry, whether it's fixing something or mowing a lawn. You can do things kindly or resentfully. And so I just encourage you. Last week, we talked about writing out the 3 things that you don't enjoy doing, and remembering, that if we're procrastinating or hurrying, that is a test of our confidence in God, right? Whether or not God is actually more enjoyable than all he has made. Add to this, okay, so that's the one thing. God is more enjoyable than all he has made. But the kindness with which we do a task, it's great practice for actually dealing with people that are difficult. We'll get there someday. But the kindness with which you do a task is the thing that both reveals whether or not you really do believe God is kind because of his character, and growing your ability that God is really kind to the righteous and the wicked, right? Not just, and certainly, and the whole key to that verse is, when he's kind to the righteous and the wicked, he's not depending on their response, right? He's kind to the righteous and wicked because of who he is, not because of who we are. And so the goal, I think, of learning to use patient kindness in whatever work needs to be done is the ultimate reward for this is the deepened belief that God is actually that way. Because if God is actually that way, you have the resources available to you, um, to do as He would do in your position, to glorify God by enjoying Him forever, by making your world a better place, and by really experiencing the treasure that you were created to experience. So go ahead and revisit that list of the 3 things that you're tempted to procrastinate or hurry on, and also add, how can I do this more kindly than I normally would? Think about actually investing an attitude of constructiveness, an attitude of benevolence for anybody that would benefit from the work that you're doing, whether or not they're physically present while you're doing that work. All right. We love you guys. Next week, we're talking about hope, the incentive to be patient and kind, and we'll talk to you guys later.